Good morning, everybody. Today we're talking about the idea of staying in charge of your own mind and not letting your temporary thoughts or emotions determine your actions. Instead, kind of how to build a deep enough why and a deep enough discipline to do what you need to do, if you feel like it or not. And I got a lot of this from a man named John Wetmore and his book called Do More Now, Get Better Later. He has a YouTube channel where he talks a lot about this stuff too. So here are four things that I hope will help everybody consistently do what we need to do and not just what we kind of want to do. Number one, your emotions are not always right. For those of you that have been participating in the 15 Laws of Growth Mastermind may have heard me talk about this before, but in the past month or so, I kind of noticed something about myself. I was kind of determining my actions, what they were going to be based on how I felt or my emotions. I was just kind of telling myself that I was like an emotionally driven person, and that's just who I was. Even though the truth is I was just kind of handling myself in that manner, like, oh, I told myself I was going to dial right now, but I just need to spend a couple minutes hyping myself up with a YouTube video. We all know how that goes. All of a sudden, 30 minutes of YouTube's wonderful algorithm later, and I just missed out on 20 to 30 dials. For those of you that use a dialer, probably even more than that. Um, or even when there's like a difficult conversation you need to have, maybe you have a client that got declined and you need to pivot, or maybe it's just something you need to address with like a family member or a friend. And a lot of times it's like easier to avoid it out of fear instead of just kind of handling it. So, um, just because you feel a certain way right now doesn't mean that's actually what you are. Emotions are not you. They're something that you're just simply experiencing. And all too often, they're not aligned with what you really want. So, emotions are not you. They're something that you're simply experiencing. Number two, motivation will get you off the ground, but will never get you over the finish line. Um, so I don't want to be the guy that keeps referencing one hard thing I did months ago and expect it to validate me forever, but let me just bring it up one last time. Most of you know that I ran my first full marathon about a month ago. And the reason why I bring this up is because while I was signing up for the race for the first few months while I was training for it, and honestly, for like the first three quarters of the race, I was really motivated. That kind of like jittery feeling of doing something new and exciting. While I was running, everybody's cheering you on, and you kind of have that false confidence that like you got this in the bag. Um, but things changed around mile 20. The motivation faded. And by the way, I was warned about this. People say that you train for like the last 6 miles of a marathon. But I was in more physical pain than I could have ever imagined. My feet were killing me. Felt like my toenails were going to fall off. Just a lot of pain. Um, and I was just honestly asking myself, like, why the hell am I doing this anyway? Um, all the motivation was gone, and I was just kind of left with like raw me. And I started hearing that little devil on my shoulder saying, like, what are you doing? You're not a marathon runner. You can't do this. But I had to shut that voice up and lean on the training and the habits that I had, that I had built leading up to this to get to the finish line. And if I'm being completely honest, I'm still trying to figure out why I did do that race in the first place, but I did finish. So running that race proved to myself that I can get through hard things even if I don't feel like it. So my my point is motivation is important to get off the ground and get you motivated to get started, but likely it'll fade and it won't be there when you need it most. So, what do we do? What do we rely on instead if motivation and our emotions are not going to be there when it gets hard? That leads me to number three, um, how to stay on track. So, you need a strong why to kind of keep you anchored when motivation fades. Motivation might get you started, but discipline keeps you going. Um, a good way to build discipline is to pick one small thing that you know you need to do, but you don't necessarily want to do. And it doesn't have to be hard. In fact, you should make it easy. Start small. Tell yourself that you're going to do that thing every day, day after day, and you'll find yourself getting it easier and easier to conquer that negative emotion you might have and just to do it anyway. Um, in other words, build habits that serve your goals and lean on them when it gets hard. I think at this point we've all heard of the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. If you haven't read it in a while, read it again. It's just important to train yourself to roll from one good activity to the next, because it leaves less time for those emotions to kind of creep in and steal your time. So, um, also something I've discovered you got to hold yourself accountable. Share with the people that mean most to you what your goals are and why you want them. Um, or even post on social media. This is something I've learned about social media. Most of the people that are scrolling past your content don't pay too much attention to it. It's just human nature, I think. But what also is human nature is that we all try our best when other people are watching. So you can kind of play that to your advantage and just put your goals out there in public and can kind of see how hard you work. So those are a couple like actionable steps to conquer your emotions, stay in charge. Um, lastly, results compound over time. Everybody talks about momentum, or how a lot of people here call it Big Mo. Um, one of my uplines, Brad Shinovar, shared this analogy with me a while ago, and I'll never forget it. Have you ever thought about how much energy it takes to get a train from a complete stop up to full speed? I don't really know the answer to that question either, but it takes a lot of power. And kind of think about how much resistance it would actually take to keep that train from moving. You could stick a big rock in front of the wheel and it would keep it from moving. Now on the flip side, once you do get that train moving, it's moving. There's not a lot that'll stop it. So now at that point, you kind of have the opposite problem. I don't know if you guys know this, but it actually takes over a mile for a train to go from full speed to a complete stop. Um, so no matter what you put in front of that train, it'll blow right through a brick wall. Now, this is kind of a good way to look at momentum in ourselves and our businesses. It may be hard in the beginning to catch it, but it's worth it. We've all heard Marshall Whalen say, like, he says, I don't think I could stop this thing if I tried. And I don't think he's mad about that when he says that. But he says that because the train is moving and his is just blowing past any kind of barrier that's set in front of it because he's built that compounding momentum. Um, and where, he grows by two times, then four times, then eight times, and so on. So, um, yeah, to kind of sum it all up, your emotions are not you. Emotions are something that you're simply experiencing. Don't let them drive the ship. Um, you can't always trust them to have your best interest at heart, so you got to stay in charge. Motivation is important in the beginning to get you off the ground, but in order to get to the finish line, you'll need to lean on habits that you build over time. And lastly, remind yourself it'll never be as hard as it is today because that positive momentum will make it easier as time goes on. So, let's do what we need to do, not what we want to do, and we'll thank ourselves later.